The bell of the convent still echoed in Sister Magdalena's ears as she stumbled through the desert night. The hollow toll marked the hour of prayer she would never return to, a sacred rhythm she had broken with her desperate escape. Moonlight washed the landscape silver, and the sand whispered beneath her sandals as though urging her onward. Each step carried her farther from the stone walls that had once been her refuge, farther from the accusing eyes of her sisters, and farther still from the shadow of the gallows that would await her if she returned. The charge against her had come swiftly and without mercy. A week ago, bandits had raided the mission stables, leaving 2 guards dead and a prized horse missing. Magdalena had been found near the stables at dawn, her hands stained with blood from tending one of the dying men. No explanation mattered. Whispers grew into conviction. She had aided the outlaw. She had betrayed her vows. She had sinned in ways the church could neither forgive nor conceal. The Mother Superior's silence had been the loudest condemnation of all. By evening, soldiers from the nearby garrison were summoned to take her away. Magdalena had not waited for them. She carried nothing save the rough wool habit clinging to her damp skin, a rosary tucked against her chest, and a waterskin stolen from the kitchens. Hunger gnawed at her belly, but fear drove her harder than any need of flesh. Somewhere behind her, she imagined the steady rhythm of boots, the flare of torches, the clatter of bridles. Every sound in the wilderness seemed to mock her with the certainty of pursuit. The call of a night bird, the snap of a twig, the restless sigh of the wind. The desert was not kind to fugitives. By day, the sun scorched her through cloth and bone. By night, cold pierced her like needles, seeping into her lungs until her breath came ragged. The land itself seemed to conspire against her, broken by arroyos that cut across her path and ridges that tore at her skirts. She prayed with each stumble, though her prayers grew strange less like supplications to God and more like bargaining whispers to the vast. Indifferent stars dot, if you would save me, Lord, let me vanish. Make me unseen. Hide me in the folds of this wilderness as you hid Moses in the cleft of the rock. But even as she prayed, another voice gnawed at her, a memory of the outlaw whose shadow had cast her into this fate. A tall man with sharp eyes who had once come to the convent for bread. He had spoken to her kindly, his Spanish tinged with a strange accent, his smile dangerous. She had seen him again by the stables that night, a blur in the darkness before. The gunfire split the air. Had she lingered too long on his gaze? Had her heart, restless in its cage of vows, betrayed her body into a crime she never intended? The memory made her cheeks burn. She ran faster, though her legs shook beneath her. By the third night, Magdalena's strength began to wane. Her lips cracked, her waterskin ran dry. She pressed the rosary against her mouth, trying to draw courage from the worn wooden beads. Every instinct told her to hide, to burrow into the earth itself, but hiding would not save her. The soldiers would not rest until they found her or until the desert claimed her bones. It was near dawn when she reached the river. The moon had already sunk behind the cliffs, and the first pale glow of morning touched the horizon. She could hear the water before she saw it, a rushing sound that filled her ears with both terror and hope. A river meant life, meant a chance to quench her thirst, meant tracks washed away. But it also meant danger. Swift currents, unseen depths. Magdalena staggered to the edge, her knees trembling. She looked behind her, half expecting to see torches cresting the ridge. Instead, she saw only emptiness. Yet emptiness did not comfort. It threatened to swallow her whole. With a sob caught in her throat, she stumbled down the bank, her sandals slipping on loose stone. Her foot caught, her body pitched forward, and in an instant she was no longer fleeing on land but falling headlong into the cold, roaring embrace of the river. The world went black, and the desert swallowed her name. The river seized her like a living beast, Cold teeth of water bit into her flesh, dragging her under before she could even cry out. The current spun her like a rag doll, grinding her against hidden stones, tearing her veil from her head. Bubbles burst from her lips in a frantic prayer that drowned before it reached heaven. Magdalena fought upward, arms flailing, lungs already burning. For an instant, her face broke the surface. She gasped at the streak of dawn above the canyon. Then the river hurled her down again into its churning depths. Panic smothered thought. Her limbs thrashed against the weight of her sodden habit, the fabric twisting around her like a shroud. This is my punishment, she thought dimly as water hammered into her ears. The Lord delivers me into his judgment. A jagged branch whipped past, and instinct seized her. She clawed at it, fingers slipping once, twice before catching. The branch bent, nearly tearing from its roots, but it held. Her chest heaved, mouth gulping both air and spray as she clung desperately. Her eyes burned, her throat raw from swallowed water. But for a moment she lived. Then the branch snapped. The river roared triumph, dragging her onward. The world blurred. Flashes of pale sky, black cliffs, the dizzying whirl of white water. Her shoulder slammed against a boulder. Pain burst down her arm. She screamed, though the sound was swallowed instantly by the torrent. Somewhere beneath the terror, training from the convent whispered through memory fragments of discipline. Rhythm of prayer beads sliding between fingers, the deliberate act of surrender. She forced herself not to fight every pull of the current, but to yield, to float when she could. Each breath became a battle won. Each second alive was stolen grace. Time unraveled. She no longer knew if minutes or hours passed in that watery chaos. Exhaustion hollowed her, yet the current carried her relentless. She thought of saints martyred in flames or beasts' jaws and wondered if her own martyrdom would be so anonymous bones buried in a riverbed, name forgotten. But then suddenly the water calmed, the river widened, slowed, its rage spent in the narrows upstream. Magdalena drifted into a swirling eddy, spinning gently like a leaf. Her grip on consciousness slipped. Her body, bruised and battered, could endure no more. She let her eyes close, certain she would not open them again. Yet something stirred. On the bank. At first she thought it a trick of delirium. A shadow moving along the rocks, a figure too tall and solid to be imagination. She heard a shout, muffled by water in her ears, then felt strong hands seize her arm. She was dragged upward, out of the current, her body scraping against gravel as she coughed violently. Vomiting river water. Her vision blurred, but shapes sharpened with each ragged breath. A man knelt over her. His skin was bronzed by sun, his hair black as a raven's wing, his eyes dark and piercing. Strips of leather and beads hung from his chest, and a long knife gleamed at his belt. His breath came fast as though he too had wrestled the river. Magdalena's heart lurched. She had heard tales of Apache raiders, merciless, cunning, sworn enemies of both settlers and soldiers. The sisters at the convent had whispered of them like demons in the wilderness. And now one crouched before her, his hand firm on her shoulder, his gaze unreadable. Her instinct was to recoil, to cross herself, to cry out for protection. But her body betrayed her, too weak to move, her voice nothing more than a hoarse rasp. The stranger studied her a long moment, as though weighing her worth, her danger, her fate. Then, without a word, he lifted her into his arms. Magdalena tried to protest, but only a broken sob left her lips. She sagged against his chest as he carried her away from the water, his stride steady and certain. The last thing she felt before darkness claimed her again was the rhythm of his heartbeat, strong, deliberate, unyielding, as though the wilderness itself had taken human form to rescue her. And in the hidden corners of her mind, a question coiled like smoke. Why would an Apache warrior save a nun, a fugitive, a stranger who belonged to a world sworn against his. When Sister Magdalena awoke, she thought at first she had crossed into eternity. The air was cool and fragrant with juniper, the sky above her a deep vault of stars. A fire crackled nearby, sending sparks into the night like restless souls climbing heavenward. For a moment she lay still, dazed, listening to the low murmur of water somewhere close. Her body ached as if struck by 1,000 blows, and her throat was raw from the river's grasp. Then she remembered. The fall, the current, the hands that had lifted her from death. Her eyes shifted. Across the fire sat a man. The flames revealed his features more clearly now, high cheekbones, hair tied back with a strip of leather, eyes dark and watchful. He was young, perhaps no older than she, yet carried himself with a gravity that made him seem carved from stone. His chest bore faint scars, old and deliberate, and a necklace of bone beads hung against his skin. A long rifle leaned within reach, but his hands were busy with something small carving a strip of wood, his knife flashing in the FIRELIGHT fear. Tightened around Magdalena's heart. Apache. She had no doubt now. All the warnings she had ever heard, the sermons spoken in hushed voices about their raids and merciless vengeance, came rushing back. Her breath quickened. She clutched the rosary at her breast as though the wooden beads alone could shield her. The man looked up. Their eyes met. For an instant the fire's crackle seemed to fade, leaving only the steady weight of his gaze. "You live," he said in halting Spanish. His voice was low, rough, but not unkind. Magdalena flinched, surprised he spoke her tongue at all. She parted her lips to answer, but only a croak escaped. He rose, poured water from a gourd into a small clay cup, and handed it to her. His movements were deliberate, careful, like one approaching a frightened animal. She hesitated, staring at the cup. To drink would be to trust. Yet her thirst burned like fire in her veins. With trembling fingers, she accepted. The water slid down her throat like a blessing. Why? Her voice faltered, hoarse. She swallowed again, tried once more. "Why did you save me?" The man did not answer immediately. He returned to his seat, set the knife aside, and stirred the fire with a stick. Sparks leapt, casting shadows across his face. "Finally," he said, "river takes enough lives. Did not need yours too." His words were simple, but something in his tone unsettled her, neither boastful nor dismissive, but carrying weight as if he bore reasons deeper than he cared to share. "I should not be here," Magdalena whispered, more to herself than to him. "I should be back at the convent, in prayer. She stopped, choking on the memory of accusations, of condemning eyes. The man studied her a long while. "Convent," he repeated, tasting the word. "You? None?" She nodded weakly. His brow furrowed, and she could not tell if it was in confusion, judgment, or curiosity. "My name is Magdalena," she said at last, as though offering her name could anchor her to some shred of truth. The man inclined his head. "Dakota," he said simply, tapping his chest. The syllables rolled smooth, foreign yet strong. Dakota. The name settled in her mind like an ember, strange and dangerous. For a long time they sat in silence, broken only by the hiss of burning wood and the sigh of night wind. Magdalena's thoughts churned. She was a fugitive, condemned by her own people. And now she was in the hands of a man who, by all laws she had ever known, should be her enemy. Yet he had not harmed her. He had given her water, fire, even life. When exhaustion finally overcame her, Magdalena lay down on the woven blanket he had placed beneath her and closed her eyes. Sleep came slowly, uneasy, tangled with doubts. But before she drifted fully into dreams, she heard Dakota's voice once more, quiet, spoken as though to himself rather than her. None who runs, he murmured. What are you running from? The question echoed in her chest long after sleep claimed her, as if the river had not drowned her sins, but only delivered her into the hands of one who could see through them. Morning came slowly, bleeding rose and gold into the desert sky. Sister Magdalena stirred beneath the thin blanket, her body stiff with bruises, her throat raw but no longer burning. For a moment she did not know where she was. The convent walls were gone. The quiet chant of matins did not rise around her. Instead, the air smelled of smoke and pine, and the low murmur of the river reminded her of the night's terror. She sat up with a start. Across the embers of the fire, Takota was crouched, his back to her, binding a strip of rawhide around a round bundle of herbs. His movements were steady, practiced, as if he had performed this ritual 1,000 times before. When he noticed she was awake, he turned without hurry, his expression unreadable. "You should eat," he said, offering her a strip of dried meat. Magdalena froze. The food smelled sharp and foreign. For a moment she thought of refusing, clinging to the fasting disciplines of her order. But her stomach growled, and the memory of days without nourishment overcame her pride. She accepted the meat with trembling hands, murmuring a quiet blessing before she dared bite. Takota watched, the faintest flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "You speak to your God," he said. "Yes," Magdalena answered softly, her voice hoarse. "Always." His gaze shifted toward the mountains. "Then perhaps your God listens." "Mine has been silent." She frowned at the words but did not challenge them. Instead, she studied him more closely. There was something in the way he moved, in the way he spoke, measured, deliberate, as though he carried secrets heavier than the pack on his back. For 2 days they traveled together along the river, Magdalena leaning on a staff Takota cut for her, while he guided them with unerring sense of direction. He showed her how to find water seeping from rocks, how to chew cactus flesh for moisture, how to press certain leaves against her bruises to draw out pain. His hands, though rough with calluses, were gentle in their work. At first, Magdalena resisted. She feared every step into his world, fearing what it meant to accept his help. But hunger, thirst, and weakness broke down her walls more quickly than argument. Soon, she found herself watching his every move, memorizing his methods. And though she prayed for strength, she also prayed she might not slow him down. Yet the bond forming between them was not without tension. One evening, as they gathered firewood, she caught him watching her fingers trace the crucifix on her rosary. "Why carry those beads?" he asked. "They remind me of my vows," she answered carefully, "of promises I must not forget." Takota tilted his head. "Promises to men who cast you out?" The words cut deep. She stiffened, clutching the rosary tighter. "You do not understand," she said sharply. "No," he replied simply, his eyes steady. "I do not." Silence fell between them, heavy as stone. Magdalena turned away, but the question gnawed at her through the night. Had her vows been broken by others' judgment, or by her own restless heart? The next day, as if to ease the weight of that silence, Takota spoke of himself in fragments. He told her of hunting trails, of the rhythm of seasons, of the way a hawk's cry could warn of danger long before eyes could see. He spoke sparingly, but each word carried the weight of truth learned through survival. Magdalena listened, half in awe, half in fear. She realized she had entered a world her convent walls had shielded her from, a world vast and untamed, where every breath was a negotiation with death. Yet beside Takota, she did not feel entirely lost. That night, as they lay near the fire, the desert stars vast above them, Magdalena dared ask a question that had burned within her since the river. "Why do you help me when I am not of your people?" Takota's gaze lingered on the flames. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, he answered, because I too am not of mine." Magdalena shivered, not from cold, but from the chill of a truth she did not yet understand. The bond between them had begun to form, but it was woven with threads of mystery, and beneath it something forbidden stirred. The desert changed as they traveled. Rolling dunes gave way to cliffs that loomed like the bones of some ancient beast, their shadows swallowing the canyon floor. For days, Dakota guided Sister Magdalena through winding passes and dry riverbeds. Always alert, always listening. His silence was steady as stone, but Magdalena began to notice cracks in it. The way his eyes lingered on distant ridgelines, the way his hand twitched near his rifle at night, the way he avoided certain trails as if ghosts walked there. At first, she did not question, but suspicion grew in her like a thorn. If he was Apache, why had he not returned her to his people? Why did he wander alone, without companions or kin? One evening, as the sun bled crimson over the cliffs, they made camp near the mouth of a cave. Dakota gathered wood for the fire, his movements clipped, restless. Magdalena watched him, then spoke softly, as though confessing to the night. "You said before, you are not of your people. What did you mean?" He paused, his back to her. For a moment she thought he would ignore the question. Instead, he straightened slowly, letting the bundle of wood drop at his feet. When he turned, his eyes held a shadow she had not seen before, dark, pained, yet resolute. "My father was a Mexican," he said flatly. "A soldier. My mother, Apache." Magdalena's breath caught. Such a union was whispered about only in scandal, the offspring condemned by both worlds. Among my mother's people, I was half-blood, not to be trusted. Among my father's, I was savage, not to be claimed. So I belong nowhere. His voice was steady, but Magdalena heard the fracture beneath. She clutched her rosary tighter, searching for words. "And yet, you survived." A humorless smile flickered across his lips. "Survival is not belonging." He crouched by the fire, struck flint, and coaxed sparks to life. The flame caught quickly, casting his face into sharp relief. He looked older in that light, worn by burdens beyond his years. "There is more," he said after a long silence. His eyes met hers, unflinching. "I was taken in by soldiers once. They thought to make me useful. They gave me their uniform, their orders, their war. I marched with them. I fought for them. I killed for them." Magdalena felt the weight of his words settle like stones in her chest. She had prayed beside soldiers, heard their confessions. She knew the toll war carved into men's souls. But to imagine this man, whom she had seen teaching her to chew cactus for water, carrying out orders under a foreign flag, it was difficult to reconcile. "Why did you leave them?" she asked quietly. Dakota's jaw tightened. "Because their war was not mine. They sent me to burn villages, to slaughter those who once called me brother. They asked me to kill my mother's kin." His voice dropped to a low growl. "I refused. I deserted." Magdalena's heart quickened. Desertion was a crime punished by death. Now she understood why his gaze was always searching the horizon, why tension coiled in his every movement. He was not merely an outcast, he was hunted. "You carry their mark still," she whispered, noticing the faint scars at his wrist, the kind she had seen left by shackles. He nodded once. "I escaped the chains, but they will not forget. To them, I am traitor. To my mother's people, I am a shame. So I walk between, belonging to neither." The fire crackled. Shadows swayed against the canyon walls, like restless spirits circling their camp. Magdalena felt a strange kinship stir within her. She too was a fugitive, condemned by her own kind, abandoned by the sanctuary she had trusted. "You saved me," she said softly. "Though you owed me nothing." Dakota's eyes lingered on hers. For a moment, She thought she saw something flicker there, not just recognition, but longing. "Perhaps," he murmured, "I saw myself in you." Magdalena lowered her gaze, her pulse quickening. The bond between them deepened, dangerous and undeniable. She knew the church would call it sin, the world would call it folly. Yet in the silence between them, she felt something neither court nor convent could name, and though Takota's secret was a burden heavy enough to crush them both, it was also the first truth that bound them together, not by accident, but by fate. The canyon seemed to grow narrower with each passing day, its stone walls pressing closer, its echoes sharper. For a fleeting while, Sister Magdalena allowed herself to believe she had found refuge in Takota's company. He taught her, too. Weave grass into cords, to read the flight of birds for signs of water, to move silently so as not to rouse rattlesnakes. At night, they spoke little, but silence itself became a language her prayers whispered into the fire. His watchful gaze fixed on the shadows. It was fragile, this peace, and it did not last. The first sign came at dawn. Takota crouched beside the riverbank, studying the sand with narrowed eyes. Magdalena approached, clutching her staff. "What is it?" she asked. He pointed to the ground. Imprints of hooves and boots pressed into the soil, sharp and fresh. Her stomach dropped. "Soldiers. They follow," Takota said. His tone was flat, but his hand hovered near the knife at his belt. "Not far." Panic rose in Magdalena like a tide. She could picture them, the men in blue coats, rifles slung over their shoulders, eyes hard with judgment. They would drag her back in chains, brand her outlaw, hang her from the gallows before the convent doors. And Takota, she knew well what fate deserters met. "Can we escape them?" she whispered. Takota's gaze swept the ridgeline, the sun glinting off his dark eyes. "We can try." For hours they pushed deeper into the wilderness. Takota set a punishing pace, his stride long and tireless. Magdalena stumbled often, her skirts tearing on thorns, but each time she faltered his hand steadied her, strong and sure. The fear of pursuit lent her strength she did not know she possessed, but the soldiers were relentless. By afternoon, the faint echo of horses drifted through the canyon. Once Magdalena swore she heard a man's shout carried on the wind. Takota's jaw clenched, but he did not falter. As night fell, they reached a small border town nestled in the valley, a cluster of adobe huts and lantern-lit cantinas, where dust and desperation clung to every doorway. Takota hesitated at the outskirts. "We should pass through quickly," he warned. Too many eyes. Magdalena, desperate for rest, begged for a pause. "Please, just a few moments. I cannot go farther without water." He relented, and together they slipped into the town's narrow street. The cantina's glow spilled onto the road, mingling with the sour scent of mescal. Magdalena kept her veil low, but even so she felt the weight of stairs. They found a well at the plaza's edge. As Magdalena filled her flask, she caught sight of a familiar face, a woman from the convent's kitchen, standing with a basket of bread. Recognition lit the woman's eyes. Her lips parted in shock. Magdalena froze. Her heart thundered. The woman's gaze darted toward the street, where a group of men lingered, locals perhaps, but one wore the unmistakable blue of a soldier's coat. Takota noticed. His hand closed around Magdalena's wrist. "We go," he hissed, but it was too late. A shout rang out. "There!" "The nun!" Chaos erupted. Townsfolk scattered as soldiers surged from the cantina, rifles raised. Magdalena's pulse roared in her ears. Takota drew her behind him, his knife flashing. In the lamplight, but he did not strike, only cleared a path with sheer force and speed. They ducked into an alley, the sound of boots thundering behind them. "Why did she betray me?" Magdalena gasped as they ran, her chest burning. Takota's voice was grim. "Fear. Fear makes enemies of all. They burst from the alley into the darkness of the open desert. Behind them, torches flared, voices barked orders, hooves thundered. The hunt was no longer distant, it was upon them as they fled into the night. Magdalena realized with cold certainty. She and Dakota were bound together now not just by secrets and survival, but by pursuit. The world would not let them rest, and in that pursuit, choices would soon be forced upon them, choices neither faith nor blood could easily forgive. By the third night of running, Magdalena's legs buckled beneath her. The desert was merciless, wind howled through the canyons, sand bit into her face, and every shadow looked like the gleam of a soldier's rifle. Dakota pulled her along, his grip unyielding, but even he knew they could not outrun horses forever. At last, he led her to a crumbling silhouette on the horizon, an abandoned mission, half buried in sand, its bell tower broken, its walls scarred by time and fire. The cross still clung to the roof, though tilted, as if heaven itself had turned away. Inside, silence ruled. Bats stirred in the rafters, and weeds pushed through cracks in the stone floor. Dakota ushered her into the nave and barred the door with a heavy beam. His face was hard, but his breath came fast. "They will come here," he said. "The tracks lead straight. We cannot hide any more." Magdalena leaned against the altar, chest heaving. The carved wood was worn smooth by the hands of long-dead priests. She pressed her palm against it, feeling the faint groove of a cross beneath her skin. How many prayers had been offered here? How many confessions heard? And what of hers? "Dakota," she whispered, "if they take me, they will hang me." His gaze met hers. "And me they will shoot like a dog." Silence thickened between them, heavy with what neither dared to say. For days, Magdalena had felt the pull of something forbidden growing like fire in her chest. Each time his hand steadied her, each glance that lingered too long, she felt her vows tremble. Now in this ruined sanctuary, with death pressing close, there was no veil strong enough to hide it. "I never wished to flee God," she said, voice breaking. "Only the judgment of men, but perhaps it is the same thing." Dakota stepped closer. His shadow fell across her face, his presence filling the space around her. "Your God and your men, are they not the same? Always demanding, always punishing?" She shook her head, tears brimming. "I don't know anymore." For the first time, his hand brushed her cheek. It was rough, scarred, yet tender. She did not pull away. Instead, she leaned into it, eyes closing. The contact was brief, but it shattered. Something inside her, a wall of stone that had stood for years. A sudden shout outside tore them apart. Torches flared against the ruined windows, boots clattered on the mission steps. The soldiers had arrived. Dakota moved swiftly, pulling her behind the altar. He laid his rifle across the stone, sighting the door. His knife gleamed at his belt, ready for close combat. He looked to her once, his expression steady but his eyes burning. "You must decide, Magdalena," he said. "Stay and fight with me, or step out and beg for mercy. If you surrender, they may spare you." She stared at him, heart racing. Beg for mercy? From men who already condemned her? From a church that had cast her aside? The rosary at her chest felt heavier than chains. Her lips trembled. "And if I fight? Then your path is mine," he answered. "Exile, running, no return." The door shuddered under the weight of boots. Splinters flew as rifles struck it. A voice barked an order in Spanish. "Surrender none." "Surrender. The traitor and your soul may yet be saved." Magdalena's pulse thundered. She looked at the altar, at the broken cross above. She thought of her vows, her sisters, her God, and she thought of the man beside her, carrying his own exile, offering her a road no prayer had ever promised. The door cracked. Torches blazed. Magdalena's decision rose like a flame in her chest, terrifying. Irrevocable, but hers. She turned to Dakota, her voice steady at last. "Then I choose." The mission doors burst inward with a crash of splintering wood. Smoke from the soldiers' torches rolled into the nave, filling the shadows with firelight. Voices shouted. Boots thundered against the stone. Rifles gleamed. Dakota fired once, the crack echoing through the hollow chapel. A soldier fell, and the rest ducked for cover. Magdalena pressed herself against the altar, her heart hammering. Like a bell, every instinct screamed at her to surrender, to throw herself on the mercy of men who wore the cross upon their buttons. But she remembered their eyes, their judgment already sealed. "Go!" Dakota hissed. He grabbed her hand, pulling her toward a side passage that had collapsed in part, but still open to the desert beyond. Bullets sparked against the stone as they ran, fragments showering them. Magdalena clutched her rosary, whispering a prayer. She could no longer finish. They stumbled into the night, the sky vast above them, stars wheeling like watchful eyes. The horses' neighs split the air as soldiers mounted to give chase. Dakota pulled her across the sand, every stride fierce with purpose. Magdalena's lungs burned, but she did not falter. She had chosen her path. The chase raged into dawn. Twice Dakota turned to fire, driving their pursuers back, though each shot left their pursuers hungrier, angrier. By midday, the desert mountains loomed ahead, jagged peaks rising like the spine of the earth. To cross them men escaped, but also peril. No water, no shelter, only endless stone dotted the foot of the first rise. They paused. Magdalena collapsed against a boulder, chest heaving, habit torn and dust-stained. Dakota crouched beside her, scanning the ridges. Behind them, distant figures on horseback crept closer, sunlight flashing off rifles. "This is the crossing," he said. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with urgency. "If we reach the far side, they will not follow. Too dangerous." "And if we don't?" she asked, though she already knew. He said nothing, only held out his hand. She stared at it, rough and scarred, the hand that had dragged her from the river, that had guided her through wilderness, that now offered her not salvation but exile. Slowly she placed her palm in his. They climbed. The rocks cut into her knees. The sun scorched her veil. The wind howled in the passes. At times she thought she would faint, but Dakota's steady pull kept her moving. Once, when her foot slipped, he caught her, holding her tight against him, until her breath returned. Their eyes met, and in that silence something passed between them, wordless, unholy perhaps, but undeniable. By nightfall, they reached the summit. The land stretched vast before them, endless ridges rolling toward a horizon painted in fire by the setting sun. Behind them, no torches flickered, no voices carried. Their pursuers had given up at the mountain's edge. Magdalena sank to her knees, tears streaming down her dust-streaked face. Relief and terror mingled within her. She had crossed more than mountains. She had crossed every line her vows had drawn. She was no longer Sister Magdalena of the convent. She was Magdalena, fugitive, bound to a man condemned by 2 nations. Dakota stood beside her, silent, gazing at the horizon. At last he spoke. "Beyond this, there is no return." She nodded, gripping her rosary. Its beads felt different now, not chains, but reminders. Each one carried a choice she had made, a step she had taken, a vow broken yet transformed. Then, "We walk on," she said. He looked at her, and for the first time he smiled, not in triumph, but in weary recognition, as if 2 exiles had finally found a path that belonged to neither world, yet to both. Together they descended into the unknown, and though Magdalena did not know if the road ahead would end in freedom or in ruin, she knew this: the river had not drowned her, The convent had not held her, and the world's judgment could not define her. She was crossing into something else, into a life chosen, not given.